our program today. My name is John Morse. I am the board president of the World Affairs Council of Western Massachusetts, and I want to welcome you to our Instant Issues event today featuring Laura Reed, who will be speaking on the subject of North Korea, what next? I'd like to start first by thanking our sponsors for this event, the Wilbraham and Munson Academy and Sir Speedy, and a special thanks to NAA Platkin, who are the managers of 1350 Main Street and who help give us access to this community room. I also want to welcome, because I see so many members of the board who are with us today. The able vice president of the board, Mary Beth Bergeron, is here. Mary Beth, good to see you. Jeremy Cole, Gary Breton is here. Gary, Carolyn Geer, Carolyn. Joanne Hirsch is here, I'm pretty sure. Also Megan Lungi and her side from Merriam-Webster, Matt Doobie, who is their head of business development at Merriam-Webster. John David Perez is here, Rich Rediker, and John Young. And two recently retired members from the board, Ken First is here, and also Jim Segal, our long-term treasurer. So thank you guys and women for being here to help support us in all of our activities. Also, we recently have become members with and associated with the Springfield Central Cultural District, so we're very happy to have Morgan Druniani here, who's the executive director of the Springfield Central Cultural Center. I want to make a little pitch at this point for membership in World Affairs Council. If you are not already, I would urge you to become one. Make sure that you will know about all of our upcoming events and gives you an opportunity to support the kinds of programming we do here. There is a form in the back. If you're not already a member, certainly consider it. It is highly affordable, and I think you will feel good being associated with it. Also on your tables, you should be seeing a list of upcoming events, a blue flyer, and you can see the real rich panoply of events we have for the rest of this year, dealing with issues such as cybersecurity, the Middle East, and Haiti. Also want to call your attention to the green flyer, if you don't. This is an event that we have when calendars permit it. It is an opening ceremonies event to watch the opening ceremonies of the Winter Olympics this year, which I think has some special resonance with the Korea issue. This is being held at Rich Rediker's home. He has a huge TV screen. Rich has a wonderful, generous home, and we invite everybody here to be part of that event. And with that, I'd like to get started with our speaker, and the person who will be introducing our speaker today is Ellen Morehouse. Ellen is a former student of Laura Reed's and currently serves as the Officer for Civic Engagement and Communications for the Women's Fund of Western Massachusetts. And we're very grateful to Ellen for all of the good work that she does supporting the community and also helping us here at World Affairs. So Ellen, take over.
Thank you. I have the distinct privilege to introduce Dr. Laura Reed, who was one of my poli-sci advisors and professors at UMass. So thank you. A long and illustrious bio is to follow, so please bear with me. Dr. Laura Reed, the University of Massachusetts Amherst, the Department of Political Science and Legal Studies, speaks to us today at this Instant Issues Brown Bag Lunch event on North Korea. A frequent council speaker, Dr. Reed has served as Assistant Director of the 5-College Program in Peace and World Security Studies, a fellow in managing the ATOM program at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government as a research scientist in MIT's Securities Program. She was program officer at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and served as secretary of the U.S. Pugwash Committee, which received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1995. Her research interests include U.S. national security policy, implications of globalization for peace and security, nuclear security, non-proliferation, disarmament initiatives, emerging norms of humanitarian intervention, and collective responses to transnational problems. She has taught at the University of Massachusetts, Hampshire College, Mount Holyoke, Boston College, and Wellesley College. Her research interests are far and wide, and we're lucky to have her expertise here with us today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Reid.
I just have so many things that I want to start off with. First, I am just glowing with pride and gratitude for both of the introductions. And I am so pleased. I really have been looking forward to coming and having a conversation with you over North Korea and what lies ahead. And what has been sort of for me an enduring link of doing research and work at UMass is the promise of undergraduates who have grown up post 9/11, 21st century in a very different world and are grappling with some of the most important issues that I think draw upon what we're here today to discuss. At the same time, I have to admit, what I appreciate with the group here is your long-standing interest and knowledge and familiarity with the longer-term backdrop of the conditions we face, the circumstances we face with North Korea. And so for me, I want to say it's sort of this past year has been for me so mind-boggling of just, I've become addicted to watching the news. What's next? I was away in Europe with this latest round of the false alarm with Hawaii and just gripped with what is going on, what will happen. It has been such a roller coaster. And who would have expected just a little over a year ago that we would all be sort of arguing about what's the word of the year? Is it dotard or other ones that I shall not mention that I at least was taught were not appropriate in diplomatic and public discourse. And so as I start today, I want to acknowledge and be clear that the topic of this talk was first proposed by Cynthia Melcher, and I just shout out to her. She just has her finger to the pulse in terms of identifying and organizing things. And she planned this in advance of kind of the latest explosion of concern and volatility. But nonetheless, people who have been following events in North Korea and looking at our military posture, at North Korea's brinkmanship, its aggressive actions domestically, assassinations, the tit for tat, and its determined development of not just nuclear weapons testing, but ballistic missile capabilities in a way that directly is seen as threatening to its neighbors in the region, this has been front and center in terms of people that are concerned about national security. So on the one hand, this has been a long-standing issue, and I want to stress today, as we're thinking ahead, we have to start with a grounding of the very important continuities and constraints based on the long-term legacy going all the way back to the Korean War and the armistice, and the fact that to this day, the United States does not have diplomatic relations with North Korea. We have no direct line of communication. If you do want to have a direct discussion, you go through the Swedish ambassador and the Swedish embassy. And that's, if you're lucky, that they will be able to get communication with the North Korean leadership. So we have had an ongoing period of profound adversarial, black box, dysfunctional relations with North Korea. And it has gone through a cycle of heightened threats, brinkmanship, attacks, concern, and then kind of falling back to what we now call status quo. But in any other area of national security policy, nobody would be satisfied by calling it status quo. But it is important to understand our current military posture, our current alliance structure, our current military priorities are against that long-standing backdrop going all the way back to the Korean War. So as we think about what's next, it's important to recognize that we are very profoundly constrained and in terms of organizational and institutional interests, we fall back on these past practices and policies that are important as we look ahead. So with that in mind, what I want to highlight to you is we have this question. Is it going to be more of the same? Will we be facing what in the past I see three different kind of styles, or it kind of goes in cycles in terms of what our actions and policies and concerns are with North Korea. We now have this explosion of concerned and hyper threat. The question is, with a new president, with not just the series of nuclear tests, but ICBM launches, and the fact that they now have a proven capability to reach the continental United States, and a continued, very belligerent, alarming rhetoric. If you looked at the speech on the part of the North Korean leadership for New Year's Day, it's not any cause for a feeling of like, okay, now they've proved their thing, it's going to settle down. It is quite alarming. So here we have a problem as we think about this of what lies ahead. You have one scenario, which is, we're going to continue with ongoing brinkmanship, tit for tat, these cycles of trying to get attention, trying to provoke the United States and its allies into taking North Korea as a legitimate power, as one that deserves recognition, attention, financial and political types of things that are seen as important to it. And what we now face, though, is it going to be more of the same, or are we at a breaking point? And I will be getting into that in more detail. But it's important to place this in. We've kind of been through this before, going back from the 50s, from the 90s, 1904, 1995, we were on the brink of a nuclear war during the Clinton administration. There were moments, they had a sense, the planning was there. There was a very clear, urgent feeling that North Korea's demands for developing their nuclear reactors was going to put us on the cusp of war. At the last minute, through diplomatic interventions, an agreement with not just kind of bribes of providing aid, but going on and doing things, we came back from the precipice. So the question today is, as bad as it feels, and there is no question, the reason each of you, I assume, is in this room is a sense of concern that something is really amiss and that we really are on a march to war. So on the one hand, we have this. On the other hand, there has been this cycle of brinkmanship with North Korea. And perhaps this really will be back and forth, and we will go back to, despite the dangers of escalation, a sense of what we call a status quo. And I'll get into that in more detail in terms of what we describe. Alternatively, and I'm just giving you quick takeaways, there are some that are arguing, and we had this little breather over the last weekend with discussions in Vancouver with 20 different allies and leaders going back to the Korean War of trying to jumpstart some type of a unified approach to North Korea, that through the initiative of South Korea, in tandem with the Olympics, through any number of second and third track diplomacy, that there is also a moment where we have this possibility for an incremental improvement or movement to a different stage. And this is where I think of the expression, sometimes it's darkest before the dawn. And some people are saying, as bad as it seems, as alarming as it is, and I will get into more detail, that there is this perverse logic. And there are examples from history that sometimes you have from the most conservative, belligerent, Republican leader, sometimes that allows wiggle room to push through some type of an agreement and change. So there's this perverse logic of some that think about this. And going back and thinking of examples, one fascinating, unprecedented example is going back to the 1960s, in 1968, when there were two events that President Nixon is known for during his leadership. One was the breakthrough that led to the normalization of relations with China, despite tremendous tensions and concerns over Taiwan and conflicts. So that's one example. For me, I like to take the example of what many have really forgotten about, but in 1968, President Nixon was looking over security. Of course, public attention was directed with the Vietnam War, any number of other issues. But as he evaluated threats to the United States, he looked at the very extensive offensive biological weapons program the United States was undertaking, and intelligence that showed that the Soviet Union and other countries also had offensive biological weapons programs. And he announced unilaterally that the United States was going to undertake a moratorium, and that it was committed to ending all research, development, and stockpiling of biological agents. And based on that initial moratorium from 1968 all the way through to 1972, we ended up with a treaty that outlawed a whole class of what were seen as the most difficult to, that's my little warning, to monitor, to control, to take action on. And we ended up with a treaty. So I like to use that as an example of what we might call a Black Swan event. And so I'm going to give you two Black Swan events. One is, as I said, out of darkness, you have dawn. And right now, I want to take a few minutes to run through with you so we're all clear that we are very much at a moment where the government, and especially the military, has taken seriously and have been given their orders to plan and prepare for war. And I just got back from discussions in Italy looking at strategic stability, bringing together individuals from all over the world, from China, from Russia, from various parts of Europe. But what really sticks in my head was hearing the conversation from a science from our weapons lab, Sandia Lab. And they are responsible for looking at cooperation and threats. And he said all his work has been sidetracked because they are now planning and preparing for how to respond to an attack against North Korea, how to deal with the potential for nuclear radiation, for responses and control, and that he was sort of saying this at the expense of their other projects. They've all been tasked to address this. So you see within the government, very serious people have put this front in the table, and I want to very quickly run through some of the loose talk in terms of key senior officials and advisors. I'll get to this more, I think, in discussion, but this is something that I think very much we need to take seriously. So on the one hand, the reason I'm here today is I believe the public's all too complacent, has not taken seriously that we are very much on a cusp to war. And if you go back, we are old enough to remember 2002, when then President Bush was, all options are on the table, just wait and see, we're going to take care of it. And we see very alarming echoes today with our president, key advisors in the United States. So we need to take this seriously. At the same time, I want to draw your attention to actually some, not so likely, but baby steps and promising opportunities that we now face to confront, to diffuse, and to reduce the likelihood that, in fact, we will go to war with North Korea in the coming future. So, again, just to summarize, as bad as it might seem today in terms of recent developments, in terms of not just Twitter feeds, I'm talking about B-1 bomber runs. I'm talking about military exercises. I'm talking about people that are being deployed and being said, you know, don't plan anything, you'll hear word soon. So this is happening around the country in a way that is all too real. At the same time, we have this moment that domestically, with the government shutdown, with military spending, there is a recognition of not just a war weariness, but of the enormous costs of war and conflict. And so there's kind of this moment where the public is taking a pause and I think could make a tremendous input. So let me just go quickly ahead. I spent too long setting this up, but we'll get to questions and answers very quickly, but I want to I hope you don't mind, but you all know I just can't bear to repeat some of Trump's tweets. I reviewed them, I have them written down here. That's one part of it. That has never before been a factor when you're talking about national security strategy and signaling to key leaders very delicate diplomatic conversations. So you have that, but you also have a lot of evidence. Just this past week, CIA Director Mike Pompeo gave a talk that reiterated that all options were on the table, that there was a very clear sense that Secretary Mattis is somehow the voice of reason because at least he is saying that we need to have these different opportunities before we kind of move ahead with war. And Mattis has said these three preconditions. He has at least noted that what would be necessary to avoid what is seen as possible escalation in coming weeks has at least been laid out. Three preconditions that have been stated by the Secretary of Defense. First of all, there is no further testing. It's very clearly, there's this red line that's been stated. North Korea has played with it and challenged it and ignored it and just very provocatively done that. But we're now at a moment where that is one piece, no further nuclear testing. Secondly, you have this issue of no further development of the existing arsenal. And so that's a second piece. We'll see whether it's realistic. And then the third piece that, to me, with my professional concerns and just seeing the movement and difficulty of really trying to address the diffuse threat posed by proliferation is Secretary of Defense Mattis says that you should have no proliferation. And this is the key piece of the unknown that we should be most alarmed based on the track record in North Korea, based on their prior actions of whether or not they would be willing to either sell or pass along some of these technologies to non-state actors or others, just as it did historically with Syria, with their nuclear reactor programs, and any number of other cases. So we have these preconditions, and the thing that's important is this is kind of more of the same. If you look at it, there are tremendous continuities going back all the way, since the 90s. But what's really different is we have also set in motion a number of different multilateral efforts. Most importantly, you have, as I hope you're familiar, a series of UN Security Council sanctions that have tried to tighten and prevent oil, currency, any number of areas that will hopefully convince North Korea economically, politically, it's not worth it to continue in this way. And you have so far a remarkably unified group of other countries that have been going along in a way that has strengthened in recent months. So you have that as a possibility. But meanwhile, we have a very mixed picture in terms of what lies ahead. So where's Cynthia? How much more time do I have? 5 minutes? Okay, perfect. So basically, in Q&A, I'll give you all my optimistic possibilities for ways in which we can diffuse the situation. But what I really want to make sure we are all really quite aware is what is being discussed right now in terms of what they call the least bad military options that are being considered, so that at least we know as a democracy what it is that is being thrown out there. You know, people use terms like a bloody nose, all-out military invasion, but it's really important to understand from a planning perspective what is actually being discussed today. So just shorthand, there are kind of 4 key types of military options that are now being planned and prepared, and it would be up to the president and key advisors whether or not to pursue these. Number 1, you shoot down any future tests or launches by North Korea. The United States, with our forward deployed forces, THAADs, and other advanced technologies, that we would try to prevent North Korea from completing any more long-range missile tests, so that you didn't get to that point where they felt they had perfected the technology. So number 1, there's a very real idea, and there's a lot of planning of this is considered a very limited strike. Now, the problem is, as you have, I hope, heard, the U.S. missile defense system is just so far from actually achieving this. There are so many complicated reasons that I can get into. They're not that complicated. They are well known and are well vetted. So basically, the chances that the United States successfully would shoot it down, both in peacetime with their tests or in wartime, are slim enough that it could see as only kind of escalating and provoking further conflict. So that's 1. So it really doesn't address the growing inventory, not likely to succeed. It puts Seoul and Tokyo, our key close allies, at risk. That's one option. Second option, just as during the Cuban Missile Crisis, there's an idea of blockading North Korea's ports. And this is something that has been discussed in conjunction to the UN Security Council sanctions. There has been discussion, there has been a tightening, and so the idea is trying to reduce certain types of fuel imports, which the country depends on, and trying to squeeze remittances, money coming back in through trade, different ways. So on the one hand, the Navy, of course, and a lot of people say, okay, this is one logical way that we can really make sure these sanctions work and make sure that this is clear, that we back it up. Now, the thing about it is, and as we've already seen, this will require lethal ordnance, lethal weapons. There will be incidents. And again, this has a very high chance of risk and failure that we need to take into account. It also means that you're really locking North Korea into a desperate situation because they really have very limited land borders, airspace. This is going to put them on a timeline that will only heighten desperation and not perhaps make them, based on their past behavior, more likely to say, Uncle, sure, I'll go along. So people are worried about whether or not that would actually reduce the military threat in the medium term. The third military option that's now being considered is to destroy North Korea's nuclear infrastructure. And this is something that has been the highest priority in terms of resources, experts, surveillance, training, and practice. And this has been going on since 2006, well, even before, but for many, many years. And what's very clear is that despite stealthy aircraft, despite the nuclear reactor that's still underway, that so far there's a very clear consensus on the part of the military that they could not successfully engage in a preventive strike that would eliminate not just the second uranium enrichment, but also perhaps other ones that are unknown and that are deeply buried underground. So there's been a lot of time and a lot of lessons on the part of North Korea. So, and for me, I do simulations with my students in class. We do every semester an online simulation of a crisis in North Korea to try to get us all to role play, to kind of think it through. And the most obvious issue with this is the danger of post-strike, of radioactive fallout, of chaos, of movement of people, and the way in which very quickly this would horrifically affect not just North Koreans, South Koreans, Chinese, the whole region, if you're really looking at the kind of way in which these cycles fall. So basically, it's just not something that is seriously considered, given the second and third order effects. The fourth option, which people are just loose mouths are kind of all into and want to have happen, is targeting Kim Jongun directly. And this poses the most fundamental tension between people that say, just like with Iraqi freedom in 2003, there was an effort to assassinate and kill Saddam Hussein. And there was a big tension and fight. And so in that case, what you see is that there was a clear sense of this was the way to try to stop and kind of uphold the issue of kind of no changing borders. But this fundamentally threatens the rule of law, our basic constitutional principles, and sets the most alarming precedent for our own leaders and our allies in the region. So this is widely seen that whether or not this could work, what the implications would be, any serious military analyst says that this is not worth it in terms of trying to achieve desired goals and would have the greatest dangers to our friends and allies, the Republic of Korea, in terms of what would happen on their borders. So, there's a number of these different military options that's been thrown out. In each case, just narrowly, in terms of this kind of US only, trying to pursue different needs, they aren't going to work in the way desired. They have different dangers. But what I'd like to stress to you is that we're misguided in the way that we have focused on only a very narrow range of tools. In our discussion, we can talk about how challenging it is dealing with this repressive regime and how hard it is to try to use political, economic types of tools. But what I would like to just really quickly throw out to you is that based on reports and experiences of people in South Korea, experts that have studied, some of the most promising avenues have to do with our greatest strengths as a democracy, as a country, in terms of engaging with other people, ideas, entrepreneurship, exchanges. Some people don't like this term of American exceptionalism, but I just came back from Europe, and even countries that politically are so adversarial with the United States would talk to me about the appeal and wanting to kind of come here. And there's a very clear separation between governmental policy, the US, our form of government, our economy, what I would call kind of the innovation. And so little by little, North Korea is not, I am not pretending North Korea is like East Germany in the 80s, and I am not suggesting that the North Koreans would, with open arms, want to reunify or anything like that. But there are a number of different options that have been proposed that really address the slow, plodding need to try to move ahead right now with the Olympics, trying to kind of create these avenues for discussion, trying to stick with our allies and friends in a multilateral way to deal with one of the biggest challenges to our security. And this is where, in terms of going through these three different scenarios, I see this very slim, maybe 15% sense of with crisis there's opportunity. And right now we are at a moment where with globalization, with the economy, with war weariness, and with this whole change of the dynamism of Southeast Asia and a recognition that there's kind of new things going on, that we have this, in terms of moving ahead, an ability. We do not have to lead alone. We do not have to act unilaterally. That is not in our interest. That won't achieve what we want. And that it's not just militarily. We have various economic multilateral deals. We have the Proliferation Security Initiative. We have economic trades and alliances. We have information sharing, any number of avenues I'm hoping to get into further on, where I see important opportunities for us to address the challenges, the dangers, the threat of, right now it's default, a march to war. 40% or better. If you're really looking at past positions and policies and the way in which our government kind of moves through these things. So on the one hand, I'm not trying to be Pollyanna-ish, but I am trying to suggest to you that right now we have a moment to really engage, to interact with other key players, and South Korea, and secondly China, and of course Japan, each has important roles to play and are offering ways for us to work together. We can get into it more in discussion. So for me, having worked on these issues, I first came of age, a child of the Cold War, and as I was looking in the 1980s arms race and these very, very scary times that we all confronted, a lot resonates with today. But what I ended up doing my thesis on was going back to the Korean War and saying, how did we get here today? How do we get out of it? And it was this key moment where the Korean War in the early 50s was, as you know, what first started the war was the North Korean invasion of South Korea. But the tragic strategic mistake the United States and the UN forces did was to expand their war aims, to go not just to reinstate the status quo, but to move north of the Yalu. The Chinese saw this as a direct threat, a newly communist country. They sent warning signs. They're like, whoa, stay away. And I feel in the same way that our current thumped up, belligerent words and our brinkmanship risk us escalating and moving into a wider war that is not of our making. And especially as we think through North Korea, it's the wrong war at the wrong time with the wrong enemy in the wrong place in light of, as we think ahead, the important issues we confront in this world in the 21st century. So anyway, we will talk more about what I see are more promising possibilities. But anyway, thank you.
Yeah, hi. I have two parts to the question here. Is that, number one, if I was Kim Jongun in North Korea, I wouldn't want to get rid of my missiles. Because I wouldn't trust us not to get rid of them. But two, the real elephant in the room is China. Because China's huge over there, and they don't want a war on their border. And if we blockade the ports, China lets things go through, it's useless. But one of the things that I always remember is that a couple years ago, I had the opportunity to be through a World Affairs meeting in the Foreign Ministry of China, talking with the person that was responsible for North Korea. The three things that he said, and I always remember. He said, one, we want a non-nuclear Korean peninsula. We don't want chaos in our border. But the main thing was that he said, look at Iraq. You got rid of Saddam Hussein, and look at the chaos that ensued. We don't like this guy. We don't like Kim Jongun, but we don't want to get rid of him because we don't know what's going to happen next, and things will get a lot worse. It's our border, it's our people, it's our chaos. And that's from China. So how do we do anything without working with China? Because they're there. It's like dealing with China getting involved in Canada. If we were going to have a nuclear war over there, we certainly wouldn't stand for that. So China seems to be the big elephant in the room.
Excellent, excellent question. And so absolutely, and what you see is historically, there was a period of six-party talks. China was a member. The United States was really trying to get China to take a more active role. More recently, there has been an important shift. Xi, the president, premier of China, and Trump have been in discussions. There has absolutely been a recognition on the part of China that with shifts from assassination and these different tests, China has changed its tune and recognizes the risks. And as you suggested, what's fundamentally misguided and what alarms me about President Trump saying Xi just needs to do more, he needs to take action, he can take care of it. We are not recognizing that as much as we feel threatened, as you suggest, it's right on their border. The idea of a collapse, reunification, chaos, right on their border is a fundamental threat, not just trade, economic, that issue of what will happen in the medium future. So what is important for Americans, we're so ethnocentric about it, we feel like, oh, China's bigger, they're wealthy, they can take care of it. They are, in fact, it is a greater threat, they are more constrained, and as you suggest, the risks and dangers are higher for them in a very immediate sense. You saw that just with sanctions, tightened sanctions. They had riots in their country of fishermen and traders that were not allowed to bring in fish from North Korean ports, that they had a very big threat to their key concern, domestic peace and stability, both within their country and on their border. And the United States needs to have a better appreciation of the fact that, yes, China has, in terms of economic ties, supplying oil, different goods to North Korea, they have leverage, but that does not mean they're in a position of trying to exact exactly as you said. So again, this is the problem of kind of ethnocentrism in terms of the way the United States and the way that President Trump has been negotiating with China without recognizing the very hard position that it is in. So I'm glad you're highlighting that. At the same time, what you see is there is a glimmer with South Korea, with China, Japan, that they have recognized that North Korea has been behaving in a way that is truly a threat, and there is a recognition it is a repressive, heinous regime, the way it treats its own people, the way that it has created from smuggling, different activities in the region, that it is something of concern. So there are opportunities of handling it without it being this, sort of very public threat to China. Unless you do something, I'm going to slap trade restrictions, or I'm going to do X and Y in a way that puts it in an awkward position. So in terms of, this is what was unfortunate with the Proliferation Security Initiative, the meeting in Vancouver last weekend. It got eclipsed by other things with the government shutdown, but it excluded China. And this was a lost opportunity because China is absolutely somebody that's key to any type of diplomatic and efforts to kind of tighten sanctions. So you're absolutely right in terms of highlighting that. Yes, yes.
Well, it occurs to me that in addition to our government's outright plans and actions to marginalize us around the world in foreign affairs, it occurs to me that that's exactly what countries are doing right now, that we're going to become a non-factor, a non-player in all this. You've got the two Koreas now, over the Olympics thing. Let's not blow it up more than probably what it is. I can't believe that China is not encouraging that. I can't believe that we didn't invite China to the Vancouver talks. We're out of the PPT now. China is becoming more and more aggressive around the world in all the areas that we're withdrawing from, including Europe, Africa, everywhere. And I think that what's happening over there right now is an agreement with folks in that region. We're going to take care of this, and we don't care. And the more that actually putting our people into those talks, trying to get us into those talks under this current administration, I think would be the most negative thing that could happen. And I think that's what's happening over there. I think that they're coming to their own agreements about how they're going to handle it, and we're just not even going to be a part of it.
Right, so just a quick response. You are highlighting in terms of what's happening with China. Again, as I tried to suggest, there's been continuity, and it happened prior to this administration with the rise of Xi, of a shift to a more offensive effort to update and expand their presence and to take a more active role, absolutely, in terms of ties with other countries and engaging, and these economic rivalries of expanding their influence. So there is no question that that is happening. And the question is, then how does the United States build upon? And again, this is where you're absolutely right in terms of this administration, and I'm just in such dismay as I see how things can change in terms of U.S. legitimacy and voice around the world. But up until a year ago, if you looked at U.S. alliances and ties and engagements, there's no other country that has the network, the close ties, intelligence sharing, the types of very deep relationships that the United States shares. At the same time, China has unprecedented, if you're looking at military, China, again, it's hard to get accurate information, 8% increase in their military every year, quite expanded, 17 countries on their border negotiating all different types of deals, economic on out. There is no question that, we're frenemies, rivals, whatever you want to say, that's a key dimension. And what people have been talking about is the way that North Korea is trying to create this wedge. Not just with China, because this has been long-standing, but more alarmingly with South Korea and with Japan and other neighbors. And that's the piece that China is like, fine, you do the work for me. So I think you're raising a good point. In the back, yeah.
On the Olympics, is North Korea going to the Olympics just a nice little diplomatic blip, or is it really a big distraction from the real issues that North Korea wants us to have?
Yeah, so I will tell you, I'm no insider, but I've been looking at different people that are just saying two things. It's really important for us not to be so ethnocentric. This is South Korea's moment on the stage, and they play a fundamental role in terms of influencing and shaping. And with the new, more liberal head of South Korea, there is a very clear sense that they do not want, they want to use this as an opportunity. they know that if they totally exclude North Korea, you know, they were very worried all along that there'd be some type of military exchange or some way to try to embarrass them. So South Korea has a very clear national interest, security interest, safety interest, as the United States agrees, of keeping North Korea in line. So what most people are saying, David Ignatius and the Post and other people are like, okay, we're going to have a pause. Everyone sees this as a timeout. There is this one moment, whether or not North Korea will have their military parade on February 8th, right in the come up to opening ceremonies, but nonetheless, there has been this sense of, okay, and I personally, you know, again, as with siblings and stuff, as much as you fight with your siblings, you bond over some other authority, mostly your parents coming in and telling you you're both in trouble, and you see this with both North and South Korea, that in light of recent actions on the part of the United States and policies, that it actually has brought them together in terms of this one moment of symbolically recognizing, you know, ethnically and nationally and historically, because they had been occupied by outside powers, to recognize themselves as a people. So in terms of the Olympics, no crystal ball, but I personally felt very happy based on, as I looked through other past efforts, you know, in the run-up to Olympics and how important it is to the host country. You know, you don't, even despite all the problems, there is a show has to go on, we're going to make it successful, and then we'll deal with everything else once it ends. So that's at least cause for a little bit of a sigh. Yes?
My name is Dave Bingo. I'm a former 12-year state representative from Springfield, Wilbraham, so I've been interested in public issues. But on this, when I was in the Army, I was stationed in the hills of Korea, near the city of Tongdu-Shawnee. And Eisenhower was president, and only a military could cut the military budget as he did, so we were understaffed. There was a system, Korean soldiers lived with us, worked with us, went in dining room together, and I found them sensitive, empathetic, and I hope they make it out okay.
Well, I can only tell you that, again, my dad served in during the Korean War and did naval intelligence throughout his career. And you absolutely have this profound history of the evolution and changes of an alliance. And all that people have gone back and understood, it's absolutely, from the Korean War period to today, it's remarkable, the transformation in terms of the alliance, the ties, the professionalism with South Korea and the US military. And again, but this is, the bad side to that is these military exercises that are engaged in routinely are seen as directly threatening, because the whole point of these exercises is they're practicing invasions of North Korea together in a coordinated, integrated way, very professional, and as you're suggesting, very closely. So you're absolutely right to highlight, and especially in terms of, as you see, the way in which South Korea, as it's been an emerging democracy, its economic success, its transformation in the last decade, it's very important to recognize. On the one hand, it's changed, has very close ties with the United States. On the other hand, it still has a national identity and a very core spirit in terms of trying to recognize the wrongs of being occupied and oppressed over the 20th century by outside powers.
How much support he has in North Korea from the people in the street, the actual people in the street?
Yeah. So this is where I have absolutely fabulous information, but first of all, it's extremely hard to get accurate information. And this is the most repressive, closed regime that you have. But you have, and I've looked to several different groups, but one particular group is called LINK, and it's a group that is trying to help North Korean refugees who have left the country to resettle and to identify. And a lot of South Koreans that have studied and tried to understand what happens in North Korea, it is not like any other country in the world. It has, in terms of human rights abuses, social control, the gravest challenges of it's broken down into a three-tiered system depending on how closely your relatives and families supported initially the first Kim throughout, and it depends, food, opportunity, imprisonment, education. So in terms of people on the street in South Korea, it is not like anywhere else. You're not going to see anything comparable to an Arab Spring in terms of young people or educated class or anything kind of naturally coming out and opposing this regime in light of the absolutely ruthless, comprehensive social control and, from the gulag to various ways in which it has kept people in the dark. I just went through CIA fact book. Only 13% of North Korea has access to electricity. It's even lower if you're talking about cell phones, other forms of communication. So it is absolutely fundamental not to kind of be misguided and think, oh, there'll be some type of spontaneous upheaval. Even more importantly, what you see is South Koreans who have grown up, young people and other people, despite what I was talking about in terms of the actual shared identity, are not so interested and engaged with North Koreans. So it's not like you have this effort to kind of bring them in and kind of welcome them on. It's a kind of sense of like a kind of lack of interest in a way that is notable, but it's also because there's very little information appeal. So in terms of North Korea itself, the real human rights activists, the people on the ground, are very clear. And again, US intelligence, the CIA has devoted remarkable efforts to try to get human intel support in that country with very little success, as far as we know on the outside. So you can't really think that there's some type of a populace that would rise up in the near term. Ellen.
Just a small comment I was mentioning to Dr. Reed before we started. I'm on the board of trustees for a local organization, and to maybe tie this international conversation right back to our little Western Mass, our executive director is an active member of the military guard and actually presented our board with financial planning for what it would happen if he was to be deployed. His unit would be one of the first to go to the Korean Peninsula if something happens, and set our FY19 projections ahead with literally different staffing projections as to what it would look like and what it would cost the organization if he were to be deployed in the next 3 months. And he's saying that he can literally track the trajectory based on his training, and he can see it begin to ramp up or ramp down depending on what talks we're beginning to have. So just know that this is having a local impact on our organizations, our local military, our friends and family that serve as well, sort of tying it back home.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I see this, it's not just people that are enlisted, on reserve. You see this in terms of budgetary priorities, in terms of how things are happening. We've all been preoccupied with the breakdown with the budget, but if you're looking at where things are being spent, what was seen as essential, it's very clear in terms of, again, from Secretary Tillerson, Mattis, national security advisors and planning, that we are on track, the planning is happening, and it is not just a lot of bluster. And that in terms of planning and operations, they're ready to go, and it's, within hours. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Good for you. This is the mayor of Mogadishu by Andrew Harding, who is one of our recent speakers. I want to thank you all for coming. I hope you'll make an effort to come to our next instant issues in February. We'll have Harun Ola, who will be speaking about Islamic terrorism and cybersecurity. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Excellent. Yay.